Hi, Zoe. We're going to take a look at your emphasis posting, just give you some observation here. And so we'll call it up and check it out. So first thing I usually do is just kind of look through, see if we are posting everything that we need to post. It looks like we're in pretty good shape as far as that goes. As you know, this project is really about exploring a variety of themes at various distances. It accomplishes several different things, but I really want to look at compositions that you're creating. It helps me to identify where you are as far as your knowledge about compositions. I talk about the more general stuff in the overall explanation at the beginning. The longer sort of posting that I did earlier. If you want that kind of general stuff, go ahead and go back to that. It's a bit long, but you can scrub through it. So we have this idea of moving back all the way into the close proximity. What it does is it sets up automatically a situation where you are not dealing with a subject, you're dealing with space, you're dealing with shape, you're dealing with lines. You're not making a picture of a thing, you're making something about a thing. You're using objects, you're using shapes, you're using these things in order to communicate. And that's what we do. I mean, does it matter that the letter E is shaped the way that it is? It just is. We use it and it represents a sound for us. The same thing with a circle when we're looking at visuals. Very interestingly enough, you are using certain principles that we move in to later on, stuff like the curve, where we are working out some of the phi curves and the golden ratio. You're using these converging lines, which gives us an immediate sense of pulling into the image. As you can see here, we start here and it pulls us directly into the image. You've got this wonderful curve kind of happening here. We are basically working off of the phi grid here, which is excellent. You're doing stuff intuitively, whether you know it or not. There are a few points here that I would sort of want to make here, and that would be, let's come over here. You can see right up in here, this kind of angle that's kind of going right up here and pointing itself to the corner. It's not quite directly in the corner, but when you look at a composition, like this with with four corners, basically, if we were to blank it out and make it like nothing, just a blank square, the most interesting part of that square is the corners. Yeah, they're the most dynamic part because they change direction, right? They go from here and then they move. So automatically built into your composition, you already have energy right there. So when we add things within the frame, activating those diagonal edges like that, those corners, are less important. Of course, we want to include them, but what we don't want to do, we want to avoid moving our attention to them because they're already going to have energy and attention. So what happens here is you've got these lines that are aiming sort of toward it. And we want to avoid that either by having a line like this sort of pulled down. So for instance, this line here pulled down to somewhere where this line is. If you were to cover that up, cover that line up, this line right up here, cover it up, you'll see that the eye more clearly and easily goes over to here. But right now, all the energy wants to pull us in this direction. It's a really interesting visual phenomenon that you'll see. Sort of happens here a little bit as well, where we're getting a little bit close right in here. The one thing I would say is very good is the way you're addressing here these shapes. It's a beautiful composition that you're doing here, because you are not including too much of these shapes. In other words, the shapes are enough that we understand that it is, and that we know that it continues off on here. But it's not so much that it creates a tension. If you had moved the composition over, if you had scooched it over so that this peak was over here or something, and that the curve kind of started its way down as you went out, and the curve started all in the way down when it went out, that would create this energy and tension that we don't want. So you did a beautiful job of that. And whether you knew it or not, you were actually incorporating the phi grid and the spiral there. This one's a much better job. You're not quite getting things into the corner. We have a bit of detail right up in here that probably isn't participating, but otherwise we're looking pretty good. I really appreciate that you are not using objects. It really does look like you're taking to heart some of these things like shadow. This is a really subtle way to deal with shadow. It's just really these edges, which is a fine-tune thing to pay attention to. It's a lot to think about, I understand, but you do want to pay attention to those kinds of things. Yeah, as you see it, I appreciate you're going ahead and letting them be out of focus. This is probably the most challenging part because what do? You know, it's totally open. I'm asking you to get really close and to break all of the mold, break all of the sort of things that we think about in a photograph, that it's sharp, that it's of an object, that it is subject based. And I say, go ahead and do nothing. Make a photograph of nothing. That's a real challenge. That's a very advanced sort of concept to try to work with. And everybody tries it. You have to start doing that at first. And so I think you approached it in pretty well. And the reason I think you approached it well is you went into structure. You went into a very rigid structure here, a vertical line dividing it in half, which again, as we think forward, we're looking at an alternating rhythm here. Here, you are dividing things up into thirds and dividing composition up. You're offering us some straight lines. Even though they're not in focus, it still gives us structure there. So all of these things are pointing me toward the idea that you must have some experience, or at the very least, you're very in tune with some basic principles of composition already. Now, we want to connect that language to something that you are deliberately pointing to use it in order to get an idea across, that idea being what is important to you. That's the next step for you. If you already have a plate full of tools, let's try to figure out what is important to you. What are the things that you have to communicate about? And let's get toward that. So that's what I have for you on the individual. We will talk later, and I look forward to seeing your images. All right, bye-bye now.